Have you ever wondered what really happens when a marker sits down to assess a research proposal? What catches their attention? What makes them frown or even smile? If you're preparing a research proposal for your master's or PhD, this is the video for you. Today, I'm diving into the mind of an academic marker to review the 5 critical questions they ask themselves as they evaluate your work. These are the questions that can make or break your proposal, so stick around to the end because this insight could be the edge that you need to stand out in your research. Hi, I'm Ken and I teach research at 2 UK universities and I run a business guiding masters and PhD students on research. Today, I'll let you have a peek behind the curtains and show you what we consider as we mark your submissions. Now, before we get started, let me first tell you this. Most markers want to see you succeed. They are not just looking for problems, they are looking for potential. And that means that understanding the perspective is the key to giving them exactly what they're looking for. Let's get started with the very first question. There is no point in a research paper that does not have any research value. In fact, it would be unethical to conduct research that does not contribute in any way to human knowledge or solving society's problems. Now, that is the key duty of a researcher. The research value and rationale behind conducting your research should not just be 3 lines at the end of a literature review. It should be conveyed across the introduction and literature review and rehashed again at the end. In your introduction, the purpose of your study and its contribution should be drawn out quickly. It immediately orientates the marker as to what they should be looking out for in terms of its value and essentially argue why your study is important. Now, in your literature review, this value needs to be expressed from the start to the end. You will want to draw out the importance of the topic, its impact if it's not explored, current research about it, and why are they insufficient and why your research is therefore necessary. For students who submit larger research proposals, for example 2.5k or 3k words long, I would recommend dedicating a short section at the end of the review and before the research questions and objectives to remind the reader of the research gap and rationale for your research and the value of your research output. This would then lead very nicely into your research objectives. Alignment in a research proposal is quite important. Your sections need to look like it all belong in the same research. Sometimes we see submissions where literature review, research questions, and research methods all point towards different research studies because they don't seem to connect with each other. You need to show the marker how you go from research topic to research methods. Think of your research proposal as explaining road directions. The research topic needs to link to the research rationale, which then link to the research questions and then the objectives. All the details of the research methods need to connect with the research objectives and also the gap that was presented in your literature review. For example, if your point is that there is a lack of empirical research about a topic, then you should not be proposing a systematic review on the topic. If you're collecting and analyzing data about how income levels affect mental health outcomes, for example, then your literature review should suggest that there is a possible link. And your research objective need to reflect an interest in this. If you want to explore the effectiveness of intervention A for outcome B, then you should not be using a scoping review. Like and subscribe if you want more videos about how to excel in your research from the perspective of a marker, and also do share these videos with your friends who may benefit from them as well. You don't often see this being explained in published articles, however, it's an important element to include in your university research proposal. This applies to every research decision, your method, methodology, sample, recruitment setting, inclusion-exclusion criteria, data collection method, analysis method, etc. You are marked on your knowledge and understanding of research methods, and so for the marker to give you marks on that, you need to show that you understand why the methods were chosen, or why is it suitable, or why is it the best choice for your research specifically. Naturally, this needs to be well supported with wider literature. Additionally, by explaining and justifying your research decisions, you are also demonstrating judgment and critical analysis, which you're also marked on. For example, if you're using surveys in your research, you need to explain the nature of surveys and how they link to your research objectives and how they allow you to collect data about a phenomenon. Where possible, you may also want to connect this with wider literature as well to show that this data collection method is appropriate to, say, understand patient satisfaction. If word count allows, you may want to also explain why other possible methods were not chosen. You are conducting research under very tight circumstances as a student. For a lot of students, they tend to think too big and underestimate the amount of time needed to execute the research. When you're given 3 years for a PhD or 8 months for a master's research, you do not actually have all that time to do that research. If you take the time out for reading literature and writing document, administrative tasks like getting permissions, you really only have a year or less for data collection as a PhD student and possibly 1.5 months or less for a master's student. You also need to note that more data means more analysis and sometimes more writing. You therefore need to be reasonable with the size of your research. I've seen master's proposals by students who want to survey the entire country, or PhD proposals that want to explore a problem, develop an intervention, and then test and then evaluate the intervention. Generally, if you're a master's student, your research should only use one data collection and should be a single phase study. So no systematic review plus empirical study or mixed methods research. It should be conducted in a single setting as well and make sure that you have access to the participants. You should also be dealing with one at most 2 research questions, though you can have more objectives. If you're a PhD student, you need to ensure that your study is large enough for a PhD, but also not too large that it requires a whole research team for you to get this done in 3 years. Research ethics is an important consideration, and ethics applications can actually break a study. Often, it is not that students present unethical research, but certain research studies may have a lot of ethically risky areas that have been under-considered in the proposal, or the university may not be in a position to grant approvals for such studies. So, for example, a study about stress and depression can lead to discussions about suicidal ideation, which is ethically tricky to navigate for student researchers. Some students may want to interview their own subordinates or supervisees, which then results in some ethical issues due to power differentials. In master's research, I would recommend that you avoid studies with such ethical issues because it may cause delays in your ethics approvals, which you cannot afford. For PhD students, this may be more possible, but you need to be very clear about how these will be managed. Ethics committees may ask for more information and documentation, so make sure you have these documents in hand. Ethics approvals is also another big sticking point, especially when you're conducting research in your home country. As a marker, I would expect the student to clearly state whether or not there are additional ethical approvals or permissions that are required by the home country. In some countries, you may need additional approval to conduct research, possibly from the institute themselves, such as the hospital's R&D department, or even approval from the ministry. It is your duty to find these out, and you will also need to make sure that it all fit within the time frame of your study. At the point of marking the proposal, I would usually expect the student to append information about permissions granted to recruit in whichever setting it is, even if it's conditional on the student's ethical approval from the university. Additionally, if there are other ethical approvals required from the student's country, I would expect the student to have already obtained this approval or show how it would fit reasonably within the research timeline. If no additional ethical approvals are required, I would also expect the student to declare this as well, because as markers, we do not know what the requirements are and whether the student has considered them at all. I hope that by being transparent about what we are thinking as markers, you can see how you can do well in your proposal submissions and hopefully meet our expectations. As always, I will encourage you to work closely with your research supervisor or tutor, and also do pay heed to their feedback as well. Often I get students who ignore advice and then run into issues later. Writing proposals can be very tricky. I have a number of videos addressing the earlier stages of research, and this video might help you by identifying common issues that lead to international students failing their research modules. I will see you in the next video. Goodbye.